looking at this next generation of aviation. So I've not only run a company, the 5 Alpha, which designs infrastructure, but I represent the Vertical Flight Society, which is a technical group that specifically pays very close attention to the world as we see it in the vertical lift. And that's helicopters and now eVTOL, urban air mobility. Vertical Flight Society has been around for over 77 years. So looking at the advanced air mobility world, one of the things that we're looking at and dealing with is the standards and figuring out what these standards are. The area that I'm going to kind of brief today is primarily centered around what the infrastructure piece looks like and what that means to us as helicopter pilots and operators today, and how that we're going to get along at some point in the future. One of the questions that we see right now is, what will the aircraft be that we're going to be flying? What will be the certified aircraft? There's, last count, over 400 different types, models, and manufactured type aircraft in consideration. Now, that could be something that's a drawing on a paper, or that could be something that's actually in flight testing and certification today, and everything in between. So out of that 400 plus aircraft, which ones are going to be the ones that actually become aircraft working in this environment, transporting both people and cargo? We don't know that yet. So trying to design infrastructure for an aircraft that we're not sure about yet is a challenge. But there are things that we are working on and looking at that we can do today to start laying that foundation. So in going forward, we look at all the different things that we have to figure out to make this safe and make this business case. So we look at, what's the standards, what's the certification process, and there are several aircraft that are in certification right now. So it's not a matter of if, it's more of a matter of when. So infrastructure plays a huge role in this. Where do we land? Where do we take off? And the one we just did this morning, which was weather, and we have one more after lunch, is a huge player. Like Dr. Steiner talked about, and Stephanie Avey from the Aviation Weather Center. Weather for this low altitude piece, specifically around the winds, is going to be a huge player in how we deal with this and deal with this safely. And then we get into the airspace policy. Noise is going to be a big impact on where we put these locations. How close can we put these to the urban environment? And then what's the community acceptance? Environmental impact, energy, the whole 9 yards. All those pieces will be a part of the decision-making process moving forward. So one of the questions that we have is integration. So when we look at integration, if I can get the slide to move there, don't know why it doesn't want to. There we go. Is we have airports today, and airports service airplanes, both props and jets. They also service helicopters. They'll probably service eVTOL aircraft. They'll be able to. They're capable of doing that. Now, heliports, as they stand today, service helicopters. Now, they don't service airplanes or stall aircraft, but they do service helicopters. May be able to service eVTOL aircraft with some caveats. Now, the next question is if we have this additional infrastructure, which we've come to call vertiports, will they then be able to service helicopters? So the determining factors are centered around the following: performance. Performance is going to be a major player in that. What's the geometry of the location? So a heliport today is based on the overall length and the overall rotor diameter of a helicopter. With these aircraft coming down the pike, they don't have main rotors, they have multi-rotors, and they're distributed of lift. So they don't really have a rotor diameter of sorts, and a lot of times the overall width is greater than the overall length. How does that then imply what the dynamics are when you look at the geometry that you base your landing area on, the touchdown liftoff area, the final approach takeoff area, and the safety area? And then what's the taxiway? What's the taxi position? What are the different sizes for that? And then what's the distance that you need to have for standoff? Are you going to do ground taxi only? Are you going to do air taxi or hover taxi and ground taxi? All those things play into this, and the performance values of the aircraft will guide us in figuring out what those look like. So from a aviation standpoint, as far as the geometry and the airspace, performance is going to be the key player. Now, the next piece is not so much the airspace piece that, say, the FAA here in the United States or ICAO internationally is going to be looking at. It's going to be the fire code and the building code. So we have helicopters today that run on jet fuel or avgas, so with pistons. Well, we're looking at this next generation being all electric, and all electric then brings with it its own challenges. So if we don't have jet fuel, then we don't probably have to have a foam fire suppression system for rooftop heliports. But if we have an all electric system with lithium ion batteries, what then does that look like? What do we do if we have a lithium battery ion runaway and we have to quarantine that vehicle? What then if we have a hybrid aircraft? It uses jet fuel to run a small turbine, and that small turbine turns a generator, which then provides power to batteries that then provide electricity to electric motors. Now I have two different types of power. And then there's a huge push right now in hydrogen fuel, both liquid and gas, and hydrogen fuel cells. So all of these pieces play into that. How do I alert a pilot flying overhead and he looks down? Is this a heliport? Is this a vertiport? Or is it a heliport and a vertiport? And if one or the other, is it capable of supporting only fuel, only electric, hybrid, and does it have the capability of supporting hydrogen? Then we get into the fire safety piece of what then is encompassed in that, all those different elements. With that then is what the building code then addresses. So in looking down the road at what's coming down the pike, we're trying to figure out these standards that address all those different pieces. So in that space, the International Civil Aviation Authority, ICAO, is definitely very interested in this and working towards coming up with standards. Each other country, Civil Aviation Authority, also is working in this space. The Federal Aviation Administration is heavily engaged with advanced air mobility and eVTOL aircraft. From the FAA side, they have started the development of infrastructure standards. That's ongoing right now. The other group that's very active in this space is EASA, the European Union Aviation Safety Agency. Another group, and we'll talk to this group a little bit in a minute, but ASTM International. ASTM used to stand for the American Society of Testing and Materials. Now it's just ASTM. SAE has a lot to say about a lot of the different pieces that go into this puzzle. As far as the building code, fire code, you have the International Code Council, the ICC, and they have the International Building Code, the International Fire Code, International Electric Code, and several others that are also focused on this advanced air mobility. And last, we have the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA, which if you've been associated with this group, you've heard this name before, is working on that. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So all these different standards group are working, develop standards that will be applied. Now, the big reason when we talked about infrastructure safety is currently there are no standards on the books for urban air mobility, eVTOL, and electric aircraft. There are a lot of standards on the books that speak to automotive, hybrid electric, and even hydrogen, but they haven't transitioned over to the aviation world yet. So when we talk about states and municipalities, there's nothing for them to go to as a standard and point to and say, hey, you have to build it like this. In the environment we live in today, if you want to put a heliport in, you would go to the municipality and say, I want to build a heliport at this hospital. And they're going to point you towards the Department of Transportation in that state, and also the FAA in the US, and they'll point you to the advisory circular for heliport design and development. Those are the standards we have, and then the National Fire Protection Association's 418 standard for heliports fire code. So when you look at building something in this space, we're not there yet. We have to develop the standards that then municipalities and states can point to, that we can design to. One of the groups that I'm working with the Vertical Flight Society and heavily engaged in is called ASTM. ASTM International is an international group developing standards. It's been around for a long time. There's a lot of stuff in your home today that's ASTM certified. Now, FAA has adopted ASTM standard development, started with the sports aircraft several years back, and the process works really well. ASTM F-38 is a committee for unmanned aircraft, and under F-38, we actually stood up a Vertiport design standard. It's been in place for 3.5 years and been working on these standards internationally. We're out for ballot right now with the last standard. The status on that is we're waiting for the ballot to close in next month. And once that ballot closes, if we don't have any negatives in the ballot process, we may actually have a Vertiport standard that we can point to. If we do get negatives, then we'll have to go back, readdress those, reballot that document. The other group, as I said, the National Fire Protection Association, NFPA. I'm represent the Vertical Flight Society on that committee, and that technical committee's recommendation was and is in the new 2021 guide. Reserved chapter 11 for vertiports and vertistops has been added. The technical committee is going to request public input, public comment during the next revision cycle. And normally the revision cycle for NFPA standards is 5 years. However, in this case, we see that this new technology is moving at such a fast pace that 5 years is going to be too late. So we've actually requested that the next cycle be shortened to 3 years. So if anyone in the audience is interested in participating, I am a good point of contact for this, and we're looking at the fire code specifically for not only the eVTOL and advanced air mobility world, but also how that then interacts with everything else in aviation, from airplanes to heliports to hangars to fuel systems to charging systems. So that will be kicking off probably yet this summer. Now, the NFPA actually has expanded the scope in the current 2021. So this is one of the first places you'll find a reference to vertiports and vertistops that you can point to and point municipalities to. This is going to then have the minimum requirements for these items. One additional thing that we did do, and this is probably one of the few places you can go and actually get a definition today of what a vertiport and a vertistop is defined as. These terms are very much in, what would I say, conjunction with how heliports and helistops are looked at today. The language is very similar. The vertiport definition originated from the advisory circular that the FAA had originally posted in 1991 and was since canceled 10 years later because no one ever actually developed or designed a vertiport, because those were based on very large tilt rotor aircraft. These are distributed electric lift aircraft. So this is probably one of the first places you'll find a current definition is in NFPA 418. Now, as far as Chapter 11, these are all reserved. So there's nothing in there other than the statement. So there are 19 statements. So general electric storage system, you'll hear that referred to as an ESS. NFPA has 855, which is electric storage system safety. Charging stations, there's a lot that's in the system currently on automotive and larger vehicles like buses and trucks, but nothing is in aviation yet in this area. Emergency electrical shutoff, electrical testing, aircraft batteries. There's a lot on aircraft batteries as they are designed and built today, but we're looking at these batteries being much larger and having higher voltage capacities, and the size of those and the weight of those are going to be such that the average person's not going to be able to pick one of these up and move it. What's that look like from a storage requirement? And then general electric safety, electric or battery fire containment. If you have a fire on the ground, that's one thing, but if you have a fire on a rooftop facility and the only access you have is an elevator and you have one of these thermal runaways, the last thing you want to do is try to put something like that on an elevator. Thermal runaways can be put out and then reignite within 24 hours. So how do you deal with that? What do you do to quarantine that aircraft? So those are some of the things that we're looking at in that space. Dealing with hybrid electric aircraft, you have fuel and you have electric. Then you have hydrogen fuel cells, hydrogen fueling, and hydrogen storage. We have a lot of information on it. There's actually a lot going on in hydrogen and has been for a while. If you look at NFPA 2, it's dedicated to hydrogen, but it's all automotive. So we're looking at what needs to take place to move hydrogen to the aviation side. And then general fire protection, firefighting equipment, portable fire extinguishers, then the mixed case power use, and then any other considerations. So this is a starting point. By no means is this anything close to being done. So in this space, we're looking for people to who are interested to contact the National Fire Protection Association, and if you're interested in participating, there's a process for that. If you want more information in this, please don't hesitate. Give me a call, let me know, and I'll help you walk through that. Like I said, we'll probably see this kick off, I'm guessing, this summer. Now, one of the groups, the Vertical Flight Society, happens to be putting on a major workshop next week. If anybody's interested, to plug for them, the Urban Air Mobility Infrastructure Workshop. This is 3 days that are centered around policy, local and state primarily. Down in the weeds, policy discussion on everything you can think of on urban air mobility, advanced air mobility. If you go to vtol.org/infrastructure, you can register there. It's 3 days next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. If you have a question, don't hesitate to give me a call.